Hey everyone, and welcome to week 5 of Integration of Music Theory into Modern Worship. This is the week where the rubber really hits the road. We get to put together all of the theory concepts that we've learned in the first 4 weeks and kind of see how they particularly relate to modern worship. So just as a quick review, in week 1 we covered notes, scales, and capos. In week 2 we covered intervals and chords. In week 3 we had chord inversions and bass notes, and this last week we worked on non-chord tones and just a little bit of how to improvise using kind of scales into a simple 4-chord progression. And so today we're going to use bits and pieces of each of those as we kind of see how music theory pertains to modern worship. The primary topic today is going to be the Nashville number system, but before we jump into that, I wanted to kind of show you the 3 most primary types of music within worship to kind of show you the pros and cons to each of them. And so if you are familiar with a hymnal, most of what classic pianists and organists used up until more recently was basically just straight sheet music, which looks a lot like this. Yep, that doesn't come out great, but that's okay. You get the idea. It's very rote instrumental music. Everything is very much so, these are the notes that are on the music, this is what I expect you to play, and you're going to play it verbatim with that. A pro to this particular style of music is that it, barring that you have a talented enough pianist, is you know what you're going to get with this particular type of music. Now, one of the problems with this is that I think that the art of sight reading is kind of becoming a lost one. It's one that's a little bit more far and few between, and I can have a completely separate lecture on that in and of itself. I think that as a society we are too interested in immediate gratification that we have a hard time disciplining ourselves to the discipline that is sight reading music, but that's a little bit of an aside. Now, that being said, a lot of your volunteers, specifically even within like a piano or a guitar, they're not going to be able to read this rote sheet music or even tablature if we're talking guitarists. And so what churches typically use are either called chord charts or lead sheets. Now, a lead sheet, actually let's start with chord charts. A chord chart is literally just the lyrics along with some chords over top of it. Now, in order for you to be successful at reading a chord chart, you have to have some sort of previous knowledge of the song. You have to have listened to it. That's typically helpful because there's no counting or anything that is implied within the chord chart itself. And so you need to understand where the chord changes come. Now, if you've played in a band for any amount of time, you kind of understand where chord changes lie, especially depending on if it's a 4 or a 6 song. So that is kind of helpful. Chord charts are helpful when you have more of a beginner pianist, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more today, specifically with the Nashville number system. But if you wanted a little bit more information than the chord chart, you can always use what's called a lead sheet. Now, a lead sheet has kind of the melody line, whether vocal melody line or the instrumental kind of hook tag line. And so those single notes or couple notes are typically written out, which is a little bit more attainable for the majority of musicians. But it's also accompanied by the chords over top of kind of measures. And so you know exactly when you're supposed to play what chord, so on and so forth. And so it gives you more information. Now, we're going to talk about the Nashville number system today because the song that I picked to kind of represent this is How Great Is Our God. The key that I chose for this to be in is in B flat. Now, B flat is a terrible key for guitar. There's a lot of just weird shapes, and so most guitarists are not actually going to play the same chords as is on the piano. Let me explain how this works. And again, just as a quick review from week 1, when we talked about capos, The guitarist is able to basically play the same shapes on the guitar, and yet it will make different chords. So like I said, just a quick review. If I were to just play a G chord, it would come out as a G chord on the piano. But if I'm wanting to play How Great Is Our God in the key of B flat, that's going to be a lot more challenging. And so I'm actually going to capo 3 and play a G chord, which is still in my repertoire. So I'm playing a G shape, but it's coming out as a B flat chord because a B flat chord is a minor third above G major. What does that mean? Well, G on the piano is 1, 2, 3 half steps below a B flat. And so we learned in our intervals module that a 3 half step interval is also called a minor third. And so by capoing on the 3rd fret, we are raising all of our chords up a minor third. And so I can play all the chords in the key of G, while the pianist is playing in the key of B flat. Now, as a worship leader, that's going to be incredibly difficult to keep track of, especially as you're trying to arrange the song and sing it and play your own instrument. And so what we are going to incorporate is the Nashville numbers system. Here's how it works. Instead of saying, okay, acoustic, I need you to play a B flat chord, or actually a G chord, because we're capoed. So acoustic, you're going to be playing a G chord. Rest of the band, you're going to play a B flat, okay? And then for our next chord, I need bass and piano to play a G minor chord. And acoustic, I need you to play, what is that, an E minor chord? And so there's just a lot to think about, and you're kind of having to transpose on the spot, which is another tool that the Nashville number system can kind of help you with. But in order to make your life easier, if you actually, instead of saying the names of chords, say the number that associates to that chord. Here's what I mean by that. If we're playing How Great Is Our God and it's in the key of B flat, the B flat chord is the 1 chord, okay? Going briefly back to our chords module, we talked about the diatonic chords in the major mode. Basically, as a quick reminder, using the key of C, for instance. We know that key of C has all white notes, and so if we just build our chords and we go up there using all of the notes in the key of C, we know that these are all of the chords. And so I wrote out on a piece of paper that's going to be very hard to see, but we know that in every major key, the 1 chord, or whatever key you're in, is going to be major. Okay, so in this case, B flat is a major chord. So 1 is always major, 2 and 3 are always minor in the major mode, 4 and 5 are always major, 6 is minor, and 7 is diminished. Now, we really don't need to talk about 7 because it's rarely used in worship music, but all of the major and minor chords are frequently used. So we need to remember that all major chords, 1, 4, and 5 chords, again within major keys, are always major. So what does this mean for How Great Is Our God in the key of B flat? Well, on the piano, I know that the major chords are B flat, E flat, and F. Those are the major chords. Now, in the minor chord that we're going to use in this song is a G minor. That's the minor 6. Okay? So here's the tie into the Nashville number system. I'm going to say, okay, B flat is the key that we're in, so that's the 1. The second chord that we're going to go to is a G minor. But instead of saying G minor, I'm going to count and say, okay, which scale degree is G in the scale of B flat? So I would play the B flat scale, and I would know, oh, that's a 6, okay? Now, once you kind of get used to different scales, different keys, the goal is to not have to be at a piano to be able to count out all of these things. You just kind of know, oh, okay, in B flat is the 1, G minor is the 6, E flat's the major 4, F is the major 5. And so you kind of start to internalize that as you have different keys, or as you get to know different keys better. So for How Great Is Our God, quickly turning it into numbers, the progression is 1 for 2 measures, 6 for 2 measures, a measure of 4, a measure of 5, and then 2 measures of 1. That is the chord progression in both the choruses and the bridge. Now, let's go ahead and play that through. So I'll do it on piano first. How great. Again, the 1 chord to the 6, the minor 6, 2, 3 to the 4, which is major. Back to the 1 for 2 measures. Now, with the Nashville number system, you don't need to associate the chords to be major or minor. It is implied unless stated otherwise. So the reason why the chords in the diatonic, or the diatonic chords in the major mode, are so important to remember is because if you're playing a 1 chord, you know that it's major. Unless the band director is like, hey, we're going to play a minor 1 here. That's a different story, right? But if they're just saying a number, it's based on this chart. And so 1, 4, and 5 are always major. 2, 3, and 6 always minor unless stated otherwise. So again, we've got a 1, which is major. We've got a 6, which is minor. 4, major. 5, major. And so you start to incorporate all of the principles that we've kind of started to know or understand earlier in the class. So obviously, you need to be able to know the notes in order to be able to identify the intervals and the chords that you're playing. You need to be able to know the notes in order to be able to play scales. And then once you understand kind of intervals and chords, then you can play different inversions. And we'll talk about next time kind of how you can use different inversions on the piano and different registers of the piano to kind of fill out the band setting, the band sound a little bit more so. If everyone's playing in this center octave with acoustic strumming and piano and maybe electric guitar, and everything's kind of in this general area, then there's not going to be a breadth to the music that you're creating. And so as a pianist, we need to understand, okay, some of these higher notes aren't going to be used as much, and so we as a pianist can use them because we know that the bass guitar is going to be kind of using this general area, and so we want to kind of figure out how to use the range that music offers, that our musical instruments offer, to be able to cater to the dynamics that we want to try to create within the worship setting. So let's go back to the Nashville number system really quickly. To kind of share an alternative way that this could be helpful. So I just gave the example of kind of using the Nashville number system to communicate with your band if anybody's capoed. So 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. Again, as a piano player, I'm thinking 1, 6, 4, 5, 1 in the key of B flat. As a guitar player, capo 3, I'm thinking 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of B flat. But as soon as I put my capo on, I'm like, I'm in G. And so instead of playing the chords that I just played on the piano, I'm going to play them in the key of G because I'm capoed. So, how great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God? Oh, we'll sing how great. How great is our God? And so that's kind of how the Nashville number system can kind of transcend the keys that you're in. Here's another very practical example. You come to church on Sunday morning, and there's a certain key and playing center that you're planning on using, and you show up, and me as the vocalist, I, for whatever reason, have a cold, and I'm not able to hit the higher notes that I need to hit, or it's just straining my voice, or for whatever reason, I need to drop the key. In that sort of a scenario, if you memorize the chords as numbers initially, you just have to think, okay, it's in a different key. So for instance, going back to the piano, So say How Great Is Our God was originally in B flat, as it has been in this class. But I'm like, you know what? I'm not feeling that key for whatever reason. Let's go ahead and just drop it down to G, have everybody play in G. As a pianist, if I memorize this as, okay, it's B flat, G minor, E flat, F, if I come in on a Sunday morning and I'm thinking in letters, I'm not going to be able to transpose as easily. And so, adversely, if I say, okay, it's a 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of B flat, well then guess what? As soon as they say, hey, we're actually going to transpose this down to G, I'm like, okay. So it's a 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of G. I know the 1 in G is itself, G. The 6 is an E minor. We've got C, which is a major 4, and D, which is a major 5. Oh, okay. So let's go ahead and do this together. Is our God, sing with me, how great is our God. Oh, we'll sing how great is our God. And so thinking about it in numbers and just changing the key is an easier way to transpose than feeling like I'm learning a completely different song. Now, it's important to note as a worship leader, you cannot always expect your band members to be familiar enough with the chords and the various keys that you're doing to be able to just shout out, hey, end on the 1. You can't basically typically say a full 4-chord progression, but I have worked with my musician pool. Most of them are high schoolers. Most of them I've been working to develop myself. And so I'm trying to work the Nashville number system into the culture and the communication style that we use. So when I say, hey, everyone, let's land on the 1, that is something that they understand. They're like, oh, okay, we're landing on the key that we're in. And so that is kind of the point that I've gotten to. Now, there are certain people that I'm able to be like, okay, we need to improv during this prayer or during this benediction or during communion. And I can shout out, let's go ahead and do a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of A, okay? And 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can just kind of go from there, and we all know what we're supposed to be playing. And just based on that count off, they know kind of the feel, and so on and so forth. And so depending on your musician level, you'll be able to incorporate more or less of the Nashville number system. But regardless of how much or little your band members understand about this particular concept, I believe it's really important as the worship leader to be able to incorporate this and to be able to understand this thoroughly, to be able to help answer questions, whether it's transposing questions, whether it's capo questions, whether it's just instructing your instrumentalists. It's a very important skill to have. Plus, as you get additional volunteers, maybe they are more involved in kind of the secular music within bars and whatnot. This is a common practice, common language for them. And so if you bring them in and you're like, hey, let's do a 1, 5, 6, 4, they're like, oh, okay. You kind of know what you're talking about. Like, I'm used to that. That's what I use. And so it can be a ministry tool as well, because it really is its own language. There's a lot of different elements of music that is its own language, but I believe the Nashville number system within the context of a band and with the context of worship music is definitely a language of its own. And so feel free to hit me up if you have any questions. Hopefully this makes sense, and I look forward to putting this into practice in the coming weeks with you all. Thanks, guys.